April 1945. Somewhere east of the Elbe River in the heart of collapsing Nazi Germany, a lone American Jeep rolls down a deserted road. Behind the wheel sits a 24-year-old captain from small-town South Carolina. Beside him, a lieutenant. In the back, a sergeant. 3 men, 1 Jeep, no backup, no authorization. They have already driven 40 miles beyond their own lines, 40 miles into territory still crawling with the retreating German war machine. And then around a bend in the road, they see it. Coming straight at them, a column of tanks, armored vehicles, trucks, artillery pieces, and thousands upon thousands of German soldiers. Not a platoon, not a battalion, not even a division. An entire Panzer Corps. 15,000 men, hundreds of vehicles. Enough firepower to wipe them off the face of the earth before they could even turn around. Any sane man would have thrown the Jeep into reverse. Any sane man would have floored the gas and prayed. Captain T. Moffatt Burriss was not any sane man. He was a devil in baggy pants. And what he did next became one of the most audacious bluffs in the entire history of warfare. If stories like this remind you why you love military history, take a second and hit that subscribe button. We bring you real stories of real heroes every single week. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Thomas Moffatt Burriss was born in 1919 in the rural heart of South Carolina. He was nobody's idea of a born warrior. Quiet, studious, deeply religious, he graduated from Clemson University and took a job teaching physics at Orangeburg High School for $85 a month. He had a reserve officer's commission through the ROTC, but in 1941 his biggest worry was whether his students understood Newton's second law. Then came December 7th, Pearl Harbor, and overnight, the easygoing schoolteacher from Orangeburg became a soldier. Burriss was called to active duty and sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, where the Army was building something entirely new: airborne infantry. Paratroopers. The concept was simple and terrifying. Jump out of a perfectly good airplane behind enemy lines, hit the ground and fight. No armor, no heavy artillery, just the weapons you could carry on your back and the men standing beside you. Burriss volunteered. The extra $50 a month in jump pay didn't hurt. It was more than half his old teaching salary. But it wasn't about the money. Something in the young schoolteacher craved the challenge. He wanted to prove that a quiet kid from South Carolina could be one of the toughest soldiers in the United States Army. He got his wings, and he was assigned to the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division, a unit that would soon earn a reputation as one of the most fearsome fighting forces of the Second World War. In May 1943, Burriss and the 504th shipped out for North Africa. The war in Europe was raging, and the Allies needed every man they could put on the line. Within weeks, Burriss got his first taste of combat during the invasion of Sicily. The paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines under fire, scattered across the Sicilian countryside by high winds and anti-aircraft guns. Many men landed miles from their drop zones. Some drowned in the Mediterranean, some were shot dead in their harnesses before they hit the ground. Burriss survived. He rallied his men, he fought, and he began to understand what war really was. Not the clean abstractions of a physics classroom, but chaos, blood, noise, and the faces of men dying beside you. From Sicily, the 504th moved to mainland Italy. And there, at the beachhead of Anzio in early 1944, the regiment walked into a nightmare that would define them forever. Anzio was supposed to be a bold flanking maneuver, an amphibious landing behind the German lines south of Rome designed to break the stalemate in Italy. Instead, it became a bloodbath. The Allies landed successfully, but then failed to push inland fast enough. The Germans counterattacked with ferocity. For months, the beachhead became a killing ground, a flat, exposed stretch of sand and scrub where German artillery could reach every corner. The 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment fought at Anzio with a savagery that stunned even the Germans. The paratroopers held their ground under relentless bombardment, launched nighttime raids into German positions, and fought hand-to-hand in the mud and darkness. They were surrounded on 3 sides, living in foxholes that filled with freezing water every time it rained, eating cold rations because cooking fires drew artillery strikes. Men learned to sleep in 2-hour shifts. Anything longer and you might not wake up. Shell shock was epidemic. The sound of incoming rounds, that high-pitched whistle followed by the earth-shaking blast, became the soundtrack of their lives. And still, they held. The casualties were staggering. Out of 127 men in Burriss's company, only 27 would survive the war. 27 out of 127. Think about that number. For every man who came home, nearly 4 did not. It was at Anzio that the Germans gave the 504th its legendary nickname. A German officer's diary was captured on the battlefield. In it, he had written a passage about the American paratroopers that would become the regiment's identity for eternity. He called them devils in baggy pants, because of the wide-legged jump trousers they wore and the unholy fury with which they fought. The name stuck. The devils in baggy pants had earned their reputation in blood. After Anzio, the battered 504th was pulled from the line and sent to England to refit and receive replacements. Many of the new men were raw recruits, barely trained, replacing veterans who had been killed or crippled in Italy. The 504th missed D-Day because of the rebuilding, a fact that ate at the paratroopers who had to watch their brothers in the 82nd Airborne jump into Normandy without them. But their time came in September 1944. Operation Market Garden. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery had conceived an ambitious plan to end the war by Christmas. 3 airborne divisions would be dropped in sequence across the Netherlands to capture a series of bridges, opening a corridor for British armor to punch straight through into Germany. It was the largest airborne operation in history. And for the 82nd Airborne, and for Burriss, the critical objective was the highway bridge at Nijmegen, spanning the broad, fast-flowing Wall River. The battle for Nijmegen became one of the most extraordinary feats of arms in the entire war. When the paratroopers couldn't take the bridge from the south, the 3rd Battalion of the 504th, Burriss's battalion, under Major Julian Cook, was ordered to do the unthinkable: cross the Wall River in broad daylight, in flimsy canvas boats, under direct German fire, and take the bridge from the north. It was, as Cook himself thought when he received the order, a real nightmare. On September 20th, 1944, Captain Burriss led his Company 1s into those boats. The river was 400 yards wide and running fast. German machine guns, mortars, and 20mm cannon opened up the moment the first boats hit the water. The canvas boats were shredded. Men paddled with their rifle butts when the paddles were lost. Others paddled with their bare hands. More than half of Burriss's men were killed or wounded in 15 minutes. Boats sank. Men who couldn't swim drowned under the weight of their equipment. The river ran red with American blood. But the survivors kept going. They hit the far bank, crawled across 900 yards of flat, open ground with no cover, scaled the dike on the other side, and stormed the German positions in a fury that left the defenders, many of them hardened veterans of the 10th SS Panzer Division, stunned and desperate to surrender. Burriss was wounded during the crossing. A piece of shrapnel tore into his side, but he refused to stop for treatment. There were men still fighting. There were men still dying. He would not stop while his soldiers were in the fight. He kept moving. He kept leading. He kept killing. Years later, Burriss recalled the crossing with characteristic understatement. "We had never practiced a river crossing before," he said. Some of the men couldn't even swim. Colonel Reuben Tucker, the 504th's commanding officer, was even more blunt. When a British officer asked him if his men had ever rehearsed such an operation, Tucker bit down on his cigar and replied, "No, they're getting on the job training." The Wall River crossing at Nijmegen became one of the most celebrated actions of the war. The 1977 film A Bridge Too Far, based on Cornelius Ryan's book about Operation Market Garden, depicted the crossing on screen. Actor Robert Redford played a composite character based partly on Burriss himself. But the war was far from over. December 1944 brought the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last desperate gamble in the Ardennes. On December 16th, over 200,000 German troops, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks, smashed into thinly held American lines in the frozen forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. It was the largest battle the American army would fight in the entire war. The 504th was thrown back into combat as part of the desperate Allied response. In the bitter cold, temperatures dropping well below zero, snow drifting waist-deep in the pine forests. The paratroopers fought without proper winter clothing, without adequate ammunition, and often without hot food. Frostbite took as many men as German bullets. The fighting was close, vicious, and unrelenting. German SS units pushed forward with fanatic determination. American units crumbled. Towns changed hands 3 and 4 times. But the 82nd Airborne held. The devils in baggy pants held. They always held. That was what paratroopers did. They held until they were relieved or until there was no one left to hold. Burriss and his dwindling band of survivors fought through it all. Through the Ardennes, through the Rhineland, and into Germany itself. Then came 1945, the final push. As the Allies crossed the Rhine and drove deep into the crumbling Third Reich, the war entered its final, chaotic chapter. German armies were disintegrating. Refugees clogged the roads. Entire units were surrendering. But other units, particularly SS formations, fought on with fanatic determination. In late April, Burriss and the 82nd Airborne reached the Elbe River. Orders came down from General Dwight D. Eisenhower: halt at the Elbe, do not cross. The Russians were approaching from the east, and the political decision had been made to let them take Berlin. For Burriss, it was maddening. After 2.5 years of fighting, after North Africa, Sicily, Anzio, Nijmegen, the Bulge, to be told to sit on the bank of a river and wait, the schoolteacher from South Carolina couldn't stand it. Just days before, Burriss had participated in the liberation of the Wobbling concentration camp, a subcamp of the Nijmegen system. He had walked up to the front gate, pulled his sidearm, and shot the lock off. The door swung open, and what he saw inside would haunt him for the rest of his life. Human beings reduced to skeletons wrapped in skin, piles of the dead stacked like firewood, prisoners so starved and brutalized that many of them died even after liberation, their bodies too far gone to recover. The stench was indescribable. The silence of people too weak to cry out, too broken to hope, was worse. Burriss carried that moment with him for 60 years. He talked about it in every speech, at every reunion, in every interview. Not because he wanted to relive it, but because he believed the world needed to remember what happens when evil men go unchallenged. The horror of Wobbling hardened something inside him. This war needed to end. Every day it continued meant more suffering, more death, more camps like the one he had just opened. And Moffatt Burriss was not a man who waited for permission. He turned to his lieutenant and sergeant. He pointed at the jeep, and he said something along the lines of, "Let's go across the river and see what we can see." 3 men, 1 jeep, no orders, no authorization. They crossed the Elbe and drove east into the unknown. For 40 miles, the road was eerily empty. Abandoned vehicles, burning farmhouses, the detritus of a collapsing empire, but no Germans, not a soul. And then, there they were. Coming down the road toward them, stretching back as far as the eye could see, was an entire German Panzer Corps. Tanks, armored vehicles, trucks loaded with troops, artillery pieces, thousands upon thousands of soldiers. This was the 3 SS Panzer Corps, roughly 15,000 men under the command of SS Obergruppenführer Felix Steiner, one of the most senior and experienced generals in the entire Waffen-SS. Felix Steiner was no ordinary officer. He had commanded the legendary SS Division Viking on the Eastern Front. He had fought at Narva, at Tannenberg, across the Baltic states. He was the same general who, just days earlier, had defied Hitler's direct order to launch a suicidal counterattack against the Soviets encircling Berlin, a refusal that triggered one of Hitler's most infamous rages in the bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. Steiner was a hardened, cunning, experienced commander, and now he was staring at a single American jeep blocking his road. Any reasonable calculation would have told Burriss to turn around. 15,000 armed men against 3. The math was not complicated, but Burriss understood something that the math could not measure. He understood the psychology of defeat. He understood that these German soldiers were not driving east to attack, they were driving west to escape. The Russian army was behind them, and every German soldier on the Eastern Front knew what Soviet captivity meant. Siberia. Labor camps. Death. Burriss got out of the jeep. He walked straight up to General Steiner. and in a voice that carried the authority of a man who had survived Anzio and crossed the wall under fire, he announced that he was there to accept the surrender of the 3 Panzer Corps. Steiner stared at him. The general looked at this young captain, dusty, tired, standing next to a single jeep with 2 other men, and his face registered something between disbelief and contempt. "Why should I surrender the 3rd Panzer Corps to 3 American soldiers?" Steiner asked. Burriss didn't flinch. He told Steiner the truth, and wrapped it in a bluff so bold it could have gotten him killed on the spot. "Behind me," Burriss told the general, "is the entire American army. And behind you, behind all 15,000 of your men, behind all of your tanks and your guns and your trucks, is the Russian army." He let that sink in. The silence stretched. Then he added the only thing that mattered. "You can surrender to us, or you can surrender to them. And General, we both know what happens to German officers in Russian hands." It was a masterstroke of battlefield psychology. Burriss had no army behind him. He had 2 men and a jeep. But Steiner didn't know that, and more importantly, Steiner knew exactly what was behind him. The Red Army, Stalingrad, the gulags, the mass executions. For a senior Waffen-SS general, Soviet captivity was not imprisonment. It was a death sentence. Steiner turned and walked back to his staff officers. They huddled. Voices were raised. Burriss stood there alone, exposed, his heart hammering beneath his jump jacket, while 15,000 German soldiers watched from their tanks and trucks. Any one of them could have ended this with a single bullet. Any one of them could have decided that surrendering to 3 Americans was an insult too far. The seconds crawled. Then Steiner walked back. He pulled his sidearm from its holster. A Luger. He raised it and pointed it directly at Burriss's chest. Burriss later recalled that in that moment, he had a flutter inside his body. A flutter. That was how the man who had crossed the wall under machine gun fire described the sensation of a German general pointing a loaded pistol at his heart. And then Steiner turned the pistol around. He extended the grip toward Burriss. The weapon pointed back toward Steiner himself. It was the universal gesture of surrender. The 3rd SS Panzer Corps, 15,000 men, with all of their tanks, armored vehicles, trucks, artillery, weapons, and supplies, surrendered to 3 American paratroopers and a jeep. When Burriss returned to his own lines with the news, his colonel was furious that he had disobeyed Eisenhower's orders to stay west of the Elbe. But the colonel also wasn't about to send 15,000 prisoners back. The American army disarmed the entire corps. The soldiers were processed, the tanks were captured, and Moffatt Burriss, the schoolteacher who had become a devil in baggy pants, had pulled off what may be the single most audacious bluff in the history of modern warfare. But this story is not about audacity for its own sake. It is about what the Second World War did to ordinary men and what ordinary men did to win the Second World War. T. Moffatt Burriss went home to South Carolina. He became a lawyer. He served in the South Carolina House of Representatives for 13 years. He was awarded the Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars, the Purple Heart, 3 Presidential Unit Citations, the French Fourragère, the Belgian Fourragère, and the Dutch Lanyard. He published his memoir Strike and Hold in the year 2000, telling his story and the stories of the men who fought beside him, the ones who came home and the ones who didn't. At the age of 74, Burriss returned to the Netherlands and parachuted again into Nijmegen for the 50th anniversary of the Wall River crossing. At 90, he jumped again. The people of Holland had never forgotten the Americans who bled to liberate their country. The people of Holland remembered. We should remember too. On January 4, 2019, T. Moffatt Burriss died at his home in Columbia, South Carolina. He was 99 years old. In 2019, he was posthumously inducted into the 82nd Airborne Division's Hall of Fame. He started the war as a small-town physics teacher, making $85 a month. He ended it having stared down 15,000 men and made them blink. That was the measure of a devil in baggy pants. That was the measure of the men who won the war. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another one. Hit the bell icon to get notified every time we post a new video. And if you know a veteran who deserves to have their story told, leave a comment below. We read every single one. Until next time.